Woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil sends the she-beast with wrath, because he knows the time is short. Let him who hath understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a feminist number. Its number is 668.
She lived alone, next door to me. I needed time to think, to get her memories from my mind. What did I see? Listen, I believe that slut I saw that night was huge and not just fat to me. That slut I saw on my widescreen were the reflections of her white low staring back at me. Cause in my dreams, she's always there. I double check that, but my eyes, it brings me to despair.
This is Cheeky, coming to you from behind enemy lines. For those who don't know, for a long time I was an information integrity and security consultant. In short, this means I spend a lot of time studying body language, vocal and grammatical intention and deception as an information integrity consultant. I try to ignore the lies, to ignore those who deceive, manipulate in everyday life. But this time it is unbearable. When so many people answered the questions in this so-called reasonable questions for anti-SJWs, they came very close to outlining the true intentions of the people within this so-called reasonable questions for anti-SJWs, which really was a disgusting open sewer of ignominy, as you will see when pointing out where the deception meets the road.
And a fifth of a second as what we call a micro-expression. Now look at his mouth. The suspect is secretly happy about the locations we are searching, which tells me we have the wrong location.
Have you not heard that when you speak, your intentions is mirrored in your voice by inflection?
I am deeply concerned with male addiction rates, suicide rates, and abuse rates, because I have worked with these issues in the quote-unquote real world.
An asymmetrical smile and vocal inclination is audible when compared with your standard speaking voice.
Male addiction rates are not necessarily gendered.
You mean you're conveniently interested in male addiction rates only because it helps your agenda? It is obvious with the pitch and tone of the two statements. The tonal change between interested in male addiction rates unequivocally demonstrate that you're interested in addiction rates, not males, which you're about to demonstrate.
Would you be willing as anti-feminists to put aside your differences with feminists for the greater good of addressing these issues, especially as the kind of solutions needed are not necessarily gendered?
Not only can you hear delusional smug moral superiority, you can hear a symmetrical smile in your voice, on and off, that indicates intention to deceive and to manipulate. To lure your opposition into breaking bread with you, just so you can poison them, co-opt them, and claim their achievements as your own, just to further your sick socialist and supremacy movement, like hate theism plus, to get a unisex programs to focus only on women, and acquire more taxpayers' money for your feminazi coven, and unwittingly enslave men to your privileged cause.
Would you be willing as anti-feminists to put aside your differences with feminists for the greater good of addressing these issues, especially as the kind of solutions needed are not necessarily gendered?
When you start fighting for funding and investigation into male addiction and suicide rates independently, or even examine why it is high, with some small amount of self-awareness, to demonstrate that you're not just another supremacy movement, then we can talk. Until then I am not drinking your psychotic, dangerous and venomous Kool-Aid. Everybody can see and hear how proud you are of your scheme you have come up with to lure people away from working towards real equality to support the privilegettes. No sale.
the irony of responding to the perceived political correctness of the left with exasperated reactionary hypersensitivity of your own?
In the same way that feminists, through the abhorrent practice of brainwashing innocent children before they can reason for themselves, you indoctrinate them into your cult to create your sick version of Hitlerjugend.
Are you aware that the ridiculous buzzwords you helped to popularize, like SJW and cuck and regressive, have all lost whatever meaning they once had and only serve now as catch-all insults and pejoratives to derail any meaningful conversation?
Yes, when you do, you should see a psychiatrist because your personality disorder is showing.
Why am I continually asked to answer for the views of feminists if I agree with feminism's overall aims, but don't agree much with those particular feminists? Does that mean that I can ask you to answer for anybody who labels themselves similarly to you, even if you don't agree much?
It is better than being asked to defend the views of people who don't even identify themselves as anything remotely similar to you. And why would it be so hard to answer for your support of this psychotic paradigm?
If you are not a feminist, you are a sexist, by definition.
Of course it doesn't have anything to do with this.
I also, congratulations, Your Honor, you are the new president of Atheist Alliance of America, actually.
And that answers your question of why we feel obligated to inform people about despicable frauds and swindlers like Anita Sarkeesian. Which is the reason why I feel obligated to point out your deceit and hypocrisy now.
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general? If so, what? Okay, just step up, just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk.
This coming from a man who thinks you can listen by covering your ears? Well, your body language and gestures gives your intentions away. And I would trust you to make an honest statement, when I can trust these three gentlemen to make an honest statement.
I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
If I agree with feminism's overall aims, but don't agree much with those particular feminists.
If you are not a feminist, you are a sexist, by definition.
But in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent.
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general?
Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
You people all the same, leveraging some angle, some agenda, operating for personal gain or ideology, and unwittingly are useful idiots for the establishment, through your megalomaniacal movement of self-justification and moral delusion.
In videos and in the comment sections, anti-feminists often take up the most extreme, or the weakest feminist position they can find, or they just straight up misrepresent what the feminist position is. Instead, why not take up the strongest, most robust feminist argument you can find, and really challenge yourself?
Spoiler alerts, Christie, there are no academically robust feminist theories, not one, and you have never presented one. Robust feminist theories are just as imaginary as TJ's racism delusion. Citation: every Western federal law and statistical agency in existence, and please prove me wrong, I welcome it, and your humiliation as the dreadful human beings you are. It is also prudent to point out that Christiosity is about to contradict you by pointing out the fact that we tackle in-depth analysis and the concepts of separating Islam from Muslims, which is fruit so high that you would be terrified of picking, and at your intellectual standard it would give you academic vertigo to do so.
One of the major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people. And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections. I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out, at least not that I can see. So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people in their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you?
If you say you're an egalitarian, will you call out the man-hating slurs that you see coming from people within your community? People who use terms like cuck, beta male, faggot, or mangina? So what are you doing to stop this kind of behavior in your community?
Rational, logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great. That's entirely laudable. But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, I don't know, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR?
If we are for equality and freedom of speech, and especially anonymous, are fanatical about personal sovereignty and freedom of speech, so chastising someone or one of your false flag comments, no matter how reviled, is to surrender to your psychotic, maniacal and Maoist agenda. What is a modern Stasi of the socialist justice Shotstaffel? If our comment sections or Twitter feeds were censored, we would become you, the lowest form of life, called the perpetual virtue signal for irrelevant people trying to feel important. People like you who ask questions that are more appropriate for themselves than their opposition. Stop trying to mold us into your Gestapo by your debased and dishonest practices, as you encourage us to collaborate with the most disgusting fascist movement that has ever faced humanity, the Socialist Justice Fourth Reich. And the answer can only be, we are not prepared to behave like you in an unjust and hypocritical manner as to appease you. The fact that you do not know the difference between academic forums from the recreational ones, as you criticize motivators, not arguments, on personal forums, where anti-SJWs and anti-feminists deal with constant and unyielding stupidity, ignorance, real threats and genuine ad hominem attacks from individuals from socialist justice side of the fence, not just trolls pretending to be us on other threads. It is quite obvious you've never looked in the threads of real academic opposition channels, just the most popular ones dedicated to entertainment. You chose your sample by popularity. Do you understand how academically unsound that is? Do you really have so little self-awareness when you're the one talking about the amount of followers does not correlate with credibility and validity of an argument?
Why is it that you go on and fucking on about safe spaces and trigger warnings and delicate little flowers, but continue to hide behind your cartoon avatars and your childish pseudonyms?
Who are you to take away somebody's artistic license while espousing so-called freedom from persecution and safe spaces, while you are violently and hypocritically persecuting others for not agreeing with you? Do you remember this monster, you sick hypocritical bastard? You would be the ones hiding behind your pseudonyms and avatars if the left Fourth Reich was not in power. If you were a Jew trapped in Nazi Germany, you would change your name too, and you certainly would not speak out against Nazis on the radio. Well, big surprise, Moriarty, we are in Nazi Germany. It's called the regressive left globalism. If you doubt it, then I would ask, where is David Ainsworth right now? Why did Erin Pizzey spend 17 years hiding because of the danger to her life, as feminists and SJWs sent bombs to her family because they printed the truth that didn't fit with the established narrative from your side of the camp? People exactly like you. We face genuine death threats, not fake ones, like Big Red and Anita Sarkeesian.
The day-to-day grind of you're a liar, you suck, you know.
Where you do get assaulted by socialist justice Nazis on camera, and even with video evidence they don't get charged. Where they create mobs on campuses to lynch dissenters in a very real way, where you could be labeled a misogynist, the social justice lingo for somebody who engages in wrong speak. or enemy of the statist. A real-life target for virtue signaling persecution, and the fear of employers that if they don't virtue signal themselves and fire you, they will be the target of real SJW hate mobs and cry bullies, or be labeled as misogynists/enemy of the state themselves, even though they completely disagree with you, the socialist justice Nazis, and only act on fear of SJW psychopathic rampages, and your hopeful future of gassing dissenters in your concentration camps for wrongthink, you sick hypocrite. And criticizing others for having a pseudonym, you are sick pathetic little man, that would not even have the courage to speak out, let alone require a pseudonym if the situation was reversed. But I have the suspicion that you're a coward, and if the roles were reversed you would magically become a conservative against socialist justice, you cringy piece of crap. The only question that was actually completely genuine was so ridiculous you must be a schizophrenic to think that this was even remotely reasonable, rather than a psychotic question from a demented mind.
Logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great. That's entirely laudable. But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, I don't know, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR?
You're basically asking the question, why don't you behave like us and persecute wrongthink and wrong speak and join your crazed internet Stasi and policing Twitter and social media conversation threads? We do not have the right, the prerogative, nor is it our responsibility to censor other people's freedom of speech.
The number of followers, the number of likes, the number of dislikes, the number of retweets, the number of subscribers, any of those numbers, any of those metrics, what have they got to do with the argument?
Then ignore all the voices of the small channels, which is moronically hypocritical. Please do the world a favor and not publish your methodologically schizophrenic ruminations. If you are part of the academic or even intellectual community, you would know it is your responsibility to test and retest research or even assertions. It is the responsibility of all intellectuals, so that accurate scientific information is presented, to point out vague conclusions or unsound methodology, and to debunk them even if you don't want to, in the name of academic integrity. It is called the peer review process. You might need to look this up, because it is a founding principle of broader methodological scientific method.
So what are you doing to stop this kind of behavior in your community?
This is where we differ from you. We hold up freedom of speech as the ultimate right, as it stands inside the realm of real equality and intellectuality, as we understand the benefits of the free open market of ideas, disagreement, and the difference between sound argumentation and popularity, not just play it lip service on our way to abolish disagreement speech, hate speech. We will never be participants in equality of outcome, but equality of conscience, responsibility and consequence, where you get paid what you are worth, not what you want, and the right to offend your sensibilities in pursuit of true impartiality and true egalitarianism, so as not become the very thing we resist, the sick perversion you are peddling. The fact that you are trying to manipulate us into doing such things shows your true and despicable character as the new social media fascists. Ignorance is strength, and censorship is laudable, isn't that right, Air Commandant? I mean Air Moriarty. How can you possibly police a comments section with so many comments it is impossible to monitor? How do we know that these comments that fly under the radar aren't just sock puppet accounts set up just to discredit us and waste our time with repulsive false flag comments to use as propaganda evidence to con people into accepting your vile fabricated narrative?
If you identify as an egalitarian, then I'm interested in your take on the usefulness of the concept of the original position as laid out by John Rawls in his theory of justice.
You obviously are completely clueless on this subject. Christy, have you been cutting and pasting from Wikipedia again? Because the original position argument is most damning against your cause and highlight your corruption. because justice from the original position doesn't affect prejudices without the ideal or impartial observer, as you, Christie, label one race or gender as good and the other as bad, purely on that biological premise, without evidence in your demented mind, and the open sewer that you call your mouth. Christie, the only way that you can have an original position is when that position is defined by an impartial or judicious spectator, something that you do not have any experience in obviously, and the veil of ignorance takes on a whole new meaning when discussing your camp, doesn't it, Christie? No prejudices is the starting point when considering the position of an individual judicially, and we know that prejudices is your bread and butter, Christie, and what our society runs off of these days because of views like yours in power. Any man accused of rape is instantly, and without evidence or any due process, is guilty, from your psychotic original position, Christie, and that any woman molesting children is innocent, and must be a victim of some sort of conspiracy, even when the woman's kiddie porn is recorded by themselves, and distributed by themselves. So where is your original position, Christie? Where is the ideal observer in your theory, Christie? The reality is, there is none, just a fictional oppression delusion in your type of justice, and your type of observer. If the observer is flawed, then justice is flawed, and in your case, hypocritical, dishonest, and disgusting entity, without conscience or integrity, a chamber pot with a hole in it, dripping feces and urine everywhere, and people are getting sick of the smell. And that is not hyperbolic. End communication.
Free speech is the mechanism by which we keep our society functioning. It's as a consequence of free speech and the ability to speak that people can put their finger on problems, articulate what those problems are, and we risk losing that. With Bill C-16 and its surrounding legislation, it's the first time I've seen in our legislative history where people are attempting to make us speak their language.